All right, we are unmuted and we are recorded and we have a quorum here, so we'll go ahead and get started at 6 p.m. with a flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Are there any adjustments or changes anybody would like to make to the agenda this evening? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and approve the agenda and move right in. We'll look at the KL policy review to start with. So this, we're gonna chat tonight about a couple, obviously the KLAR, so the both policy and the procedure. I've been talking with Laura about this, Laura and Krista about it. We have our LCKL and KLAR in a open space, easily navigatable online. However, there's still some questions on some of like the processes we have in place. And so in order to compare, I asked Laura to pull all of the OSBA drafts so that we could look at the draft process, like what they're suggesting. And then picked like school districts around us so that we could see what's happening in our area. And then any modifications that the board agrees upon, it's not necessarily live, because if there is a modification, just for awareness, these actually have to be sent back to legal to review before we can actually go through first and second read processes. Okay, so with that, we'll jump into the KL policy review, and I guess I open it up for discussion.
I just have to say that the KL policies are all pretty darn similar, and I think most of the questions that at least I had to do more with procedure than the policy itself.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay.
There's definitely some differences in some of the procedures, some that I like, some things that some of them that I would like to have in ours.
Okay.
I don't have much to say about the policies, because they do seem very similar, and I suspect they're all written what they are for a reason.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts for the KL? Not KLAR, just the policy.
Well, I'm kind of in agreement. I think we need to look at some of the format that's in it, really, and change some wording, maybe.
For the KL, for the policy?
Mhm.
Okay, which part?
Well, and going through a few different pieces, one of them says that there's a form available, but it's not required, and from what I'm told.
That's the AR.
Oh, okay. From my mistake.
Oh,
I
no,
was
you're
thinking the AR.
So the
So-
KL is just is our first one, just I think it's like the third or fourth page in,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, I got it right here, the first one.
Yeah,
So then I'll just keep waiting until we move forward.
so the board doesn't have any changes to the KL. That's not any, okay. Well, that. Or then with that, we'll just move straight into the KLAR. How about that? That sounds
Okay.
like the bigger discussion.
Yes,
Okay. I'm gonna open it up then. I guess, actually, I apologize. Laura, can we make a note that we're not gonna that the board doesn't want to make any note, changes to the KL policy? Dr. G, go ahead.
The only real clarification that I think is critical for our AR is moving up into, and I believe I saw one, I think it was GAP had it written fairly well, is for the electronic option of submitting the form or an email versus handwritten and signatures. I think that's a critical step in the world we live in now, to accept those complaints electronically. And other than that, I don't have anything of huge note. I think it would be kind of petty to change some of the other stuff, and I know legal would have to get involved, so that's the biggest change and clarification. we need to make.
So I'm looking, so I just wanna make sure I get this right. Is there a certain area that we're looking at that?
It's the second paragraph under administrator. It say a form is available but not required.
Well, that's
So you're getting into,
Form.
yeah.
We
but-
have that in ours. That is actually in ours.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And that's what we're discussing because it's not required to have a form, but like Jamie is saying, an email should be able.
Go to
I
Gaps.
think these
Right
are
here.
two different
Yeah.
issues. One is like whether you can submit your complaint electronically versus.
Well, that's part of the
Okay.
form, I
So let's,
thought.
but let's.
Our AR
Thank you, Jen.
on page 1-1, section, the administrator section of this
Yeah.
step 2,
Yeah.
it says the complainant may file a written signed complaint with the principal. I
So
think
this is
we
where you're
need,
wanting to put that.
and I want to make sure that that's consistent through all the steps, that electronic documentation will be accepted.
So if you look at the gaps, it's their AR, it's 1-3. If you look at step 2, it says district administrators, it's paragraph,
Hold on, let's all get there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
1-3.
Is it 1-3 or 3-1?
well, you need to go to gaps. You're in the model policy. And it's, Laura, none of the ARs are online. I noticed.
Yeah, they are.
Here, it's a separate section.
Oh, well, never mind then. I didn't go that far.
What paragraph did you say?
If you go to, so gaps,
Uh-huh.
if you go
What
to
is
step
gaps?
2, district administrator.
Yep.
Third paragraph. I'm gonna read the whole paragraph. But I want you guys to make sure that you know that GAPS has 4 different ARs, it looks like.
Oh, that's what that parentheses for.
Yeah,
means.
an appeal
Is
of
that
the,
for each building?
I have no idea. No, I think, I don't believe it's for each building. I just believe like they call like their form is like 4-AR. I'll have to look. An appeal of the level director findings may be filed with the assistant superintendent. An appeal of the department director's findings may be filed with the district leadership team administrator. The appeal must be filed using the KLAR public complaint form or the information on the form provided by email or in writing.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're talking?
Yeah.
That, okay, that you don't think that necessarily it needs to be handwritten, handed, but you could say, here's what I'm going to, this is how I'm interpreting it.
Is that form?
But you have to make sure that even if you do it in email, that the information on the form
Yes.
is in the email and it cannot have any more than that. So you can't be like, and I'm gonna keep adding more to it. Like it has to be specifically what the form says. You could just provide it via email. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yes, and once it gets to that point, they should be able to provide some documentation of the steps they've taken.
Don't disagree with you, because if you note that we have done some previous form complaints and there has been documentation, I don't disagree. The reason I ask you on that piece is because I want us to be very careful as we talk about it to make sure that we're not saying, we're just gonna take any email. Like
No.
the email has to be in compliance with the AR.
Agreed.
But the
Agreed.
email also should be able to be accepted as a complaint.
And I don't disagree. I think we have to be careful though, and this is just my advice to you all, is we have to be careful to say, we'll take an email, but we're not gonna take an email about every single.
So you-
Well, yeah,
so
I
you
mean,
limit it to
we
the-
don't want
yeah.
to hear about your pencil sharpener's not correct.
So
But
you should
yeah.
limit it to the.
To the
information
actual-
you would
yeah.
want.
yes,
So,
But I do think, I'm just gonna say, I think that this is an online form that they can download and fill out, and we have seen people download this, fill this out, and provide additional documentation attached to it. I agree that submitting it via email with signature on it is great. I would also agree that a form is available but not required, should absolutely be scratched, and we should say their form is required.
So I
the
don't
form or
think-
information asked for on the form is required.
I originally thought that, then I went through all of these and every single one refers to a form and says it's not required. I wonder if that's a legal bit.
Okay,
We could,
You can't require.
We
a
could
form. I'd like
ask.
to require a form, but
but the
I'm
contents must be specific to the form then.
limited to what.
to the nature of the complaint.
Well,
or
I would-
limited to how the
I'm gonna go back and read.
Yeah, you can first request over.
I'm gonna be really honest, like in going through these, like,
We don't, oh, sorry.
I think allowing it to go outside of this opens us up to a huge problem. And so if it's a complaint, they need to follow this form. It allows us to follow our procedures and our policies in a complaint process.
And I would agree that I would like it to say, use the form every time. Make it
Mhm.
better for everybody.
If-
However, I've noticed that all of them
Yeah.
have some out, like you don't have to use the form.
Well, maybe just use the guidelines of the form.
I like that.
No, I don't like guidelines. I'm gonna be super honest, only because it brings in gray. And so the one thing I heard in the complaint process was there was too much gray.
There's a lot of
There's a
gray
lot of
So-
because they feel like they're just making circles and they're not actually getting their point or their complaint heard. So I think that's what we really need to focus on is making sure that we are hearing the complaint that's being brought to us.
Can I ask you a question about that, just to clarify? When you say you actually hear, do you mean that you are able to not only see this form or the information on the form, but also the documentation?
Well, yeah, the documentation.
Okay. Is there any way, and I could ask I could ask Pace this. Is there any way that we could, well, because it says what evidence should we consider? Well,
Yeah.
we could maybe say, if you have or if necessary, please attach evidence.
Or the steps being taken to,
What you've already done prior to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a requirement of like getting it to the board in the first.
Yeah, you
place.
have to go to
So
step.
we should ask them to write down what have they done so far.
Well, and
Well, I
that's,
think-
that's involved in that section where it's what, who should we talk to and what evidence should we consider? I mean, that's evident.
Because technically, I mean, if you guys think about it, the only personnel complaint you should hear is me. And so really, if you're thinking about what steps, they should say, our policy states that the board,
could I slightly disagree with that statement? Just slightly?
well, legally you can't. The only person,
Well, because if a complaint's been brought to her about something else and they don't like, or they don't feel that their complaint has been heard,
then it's against me,
And
not the
resolved.
other person. The complaint then is against me because you guys do not hear complaint on any other employee unless it's an appeal of dismissal.
So when things are sent, we had a situation previously with a previous superintendent. And they followed this process, actually. They followed this. They used the form and sent all of it in. Unfortunately, in the situation, they named personnel in this. And I had to hand it back and say, I'm very sorry, but I can't accept this complaint. You need to take this to the lower level. And that was based off of events and legal advice. Like you cannot hear or see personnel information in your complaint. The only person we can see is a complaint against it has to be against a superintendent.
So one of the OSB model sample here, it doesn't say that it changes to a complaint about superintendent. We then appeal to the decision the superintendent made to the board.
You can. So if I say, for example, a complaint, and this is how I understand it. If I have a complaint against a personnel that would require for me to dismiss them, they have the right, and because ultimately I recommend dismissal to you all. They have the right to come in and say, I don't think I should be dismissed for these purposes. You guys don't have the right to do anything else. You don't have the right, in my understanding of the law, you don't have the right to discipline an employee.
right?
I'm the only one that can. Now, if they don't like my discipline, which I think is only dismissal, they can come to you and you can override that. But if I put somebody like, if I give them a directive, they don't have the right to say, well, I don't like the directive, I'm going to the board. I believe that is the only,
Unless you have violated a policy.
Unless
or
I have
preceded-
violated-
Unless you've done something that's violated a
Mhm.
policy,
But I think.
potentially.
where are
to
you
a
at?
layperson, like the board, step 3, it looks like if
Which one are you
If
on?
someone's, the post-grade model sample policy is one. The speaker, the board step 3. And if someone's complaining about something to superintendent and doesn't like the superintendent's response, it looks as if then they just take that up to the step 3 to go to the board with that same complaint. Now, we're not saying, okay, now I gotta explain about the superintendent, they just elevate this
So you're an OSBA model what?
Model sample policy procedure number,
You got it. You're right.
down at the board, step 3. When I'm reading this, that not being educated or administrator, it looks like if I don't.
So
like what
that's-
the
yeah.
superintendent Says to me about my complaint, then I can go to the board and say, I didn't like what the superintendent said.
Yes, I agree with that reading.
But if you read, we have to be super careful because there are OARs. Because really, I think, I don't know. I think for me, like I said, the only thing I know that you guys could overturn of my final decision or any superintendent's final decision is of dismissal. So I'm not sure. I guess I would have to look.
Well, I
into
don't
that.
think that's
But
what
I'm
this
just pointing
says.
out that
Yeah, no, I
it
agree with
really
you on that.
looks
It
to
looks
like that your average person who doesn't know that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't
they
think
can just
that's
bring
what
their
this
complaints
says.
To the board. I feel like all of them say something like this. Really,
Ours is in step 4, it's just not step 3.
Yeah, that's what I thought as our numbering was odd.
Yeah.
Do we add another step?
Well, it's like
One-
we,
involved going.
When we say initiating. a
Oh,
complaint,
initiating is step
First thing
one.
is going
Yeah.
Straight to the, speaking of the person who's got a problem. Rather than their
Yeah,
supervisor.
so it sounds like the only the only exclusion, what you mentioned, the OARs, is what puts us from public meeting, or excuse me, from open meeting to executive session.
And if we do, like, for example, if there was a complaint against me, I could choose to have it in public session if I
Right.
wanted to. But if I choose to have that complaint in the public session, then the person who filed the complaint has the right to be in public session. I see what you all are saying. I don't know because of the OARs. I mean, specifically, if you look at the OARs, like, for example, there's 9 reasons why a teacher can be dismissed after their contract. So I would have to show, if I was going to dismiss a teacher, I would have to, a contract teacher, I would have to show evidence
Show cause, yeah.
under these particular 9. For a superintendent, for dismissal, I think for cause, I think it's only 4. It's not a lot. And so I think also one of the reasons perhaps it is worded as such is that they want to make sure that the rules are, for lack of a better term, insulating, that the wording is in such a way that it insulates the board from any liability. And so like I said, my understanding is the only way that you can go from the superintendent to the board if you're dissatisfied is if it has to deal with personnel and business. Unless I believe. I mean, the only other thing I could think of is if I, as a superintendent, said, I'm going to allow that person to keep their job and they think they have enough evidence to go for dismissal, but then I would say we really totally need to get legal into that. Like, it shouldn't just be like, now go to the board. We could, but the board, our legal might say, no. I'm trying to see what the other ones.
The one thing,
I mean, and that's what ours say too.
ours says that though. I
Ours
guess
says the
that's- I
whole
guess that's
thing.
the question.
So I wonder if that's a question we might need to ask. OSBA or legal is this key, does any complaint can come eventually to the board, or do we need to make it clear that it has to turn into a complaint about the superintendent?
But see, but if you read like
It says-
Eddyville's AR,
Oh, sorry.
Eddyville's AR says the same thing.
Well, so it says this, so, okay, so the way I read this also is if the complaint is dissatisfied with the superintendent's findings, they're still, they're bringing a formal complaint against the superintendent.
That's how I think it is.
Well, that would be what it would have to be.
But they don't, but they're bringing that, so in my, I guess my tunnel vision in this one, and I could be totally wrong, is they're bringing a complaint against the superintendent, which leaves all personnel out of that conversation.
Right.
Mhm. So I think like if,
So that and I'm concerned that your average person making a complaint is not gonna know this. And they're gonna go ahead and just send it to the board, and we're gonna be like, we can't see this.
but this, I want to also point out, if you look at the policy, that's the reason why it says all complaints will first go through the board chair, because that the board chair is the one that then says, does this policy fit? And if it doesn't, we send it back. Because
In the policy
technically,
or the AR, sorry, I know it's in the AR.
it's in the AR, because it says all complaints about the superintendent go
Oh,
directly,
It says in the policy too, sorry.
yeah, directly to the board chair.
But then it also says the board shall present these to the board. It doesn't have any modifications as after, evaluating it.
I don't disagree with you on that. However, I do think, and this is again, advice to you all. If you're gonna hear every single complaint, we're gonna be here forever. I think that's why you do a board chair. If you actually look even at my contract, it says if there's if there's whatever, it should go immediately to the board chair to come. And so I think if you guys have a board chair, I think that's the piece where the board chair says, does the complaint fit our policy and AR? Because if it doesn't, then we go back, because you should not hear anything that does not follow policy. Because if you do and you decide to act on it, an employee or myself decides that you did not follow policy, now you've opened up the district to liability. I could bring my lawyer in and say, I don't agree with your finding. Here's the process. You did not follow your policy. So I think that's why you have the board chair see if it fits the policy before bringing it to the board. Does that make sense? Because technically, if they brought it to the board, we can do an executive session. And if it's against me, I could bring my lawyer to the executive session, because it is a potential for a disciplinary action. So I would be super careful of saying anything that goes to the board chair automatically has to come to the board. I think the role of the board chair is to ensure that the policy is completely followed. And if it's not, where can we go? Because our policy also says, where do we want to try to get it resolved at?
We want it step one.
And so we know that some people may not go there. They may jump to the last step. So that's why you want to see all these different pieces.
Well, while you're on that topic, I like how Eddyville had theirs named for a smaller charter district where the leadership wears multiple hats.
Is that
I
in the
like
AR?
It was, I believe it was. Let me
Okay.
find it again.
Thank you for the papers. These are actually super helpful.
I had a set that I had my notes on already. Of course.
Yeah, I did too, and all my highlighted.
Good highlight.
Helps me think out loud.
Yeah, it is in the AR.
In Eddyville,
I think so. Yeah, cause it. They kind of have one less step than we do.
Yeah.
Because we have a principal and super, so it basically goes right over the head of principal straight to super.
Because it talks about public charter school employee involved rather than saying,
Well, it's also that, it's streamlined for an organization where they know they're gonna have a principal and superintendent or the same person. You haven't had that until. We could streamline it where it's something we intend to. In the future.
I mean, you could streamline it, and then if it ever happens where we get big enough and it's a split, you could go back.
Step it back into administrator before super.
But my goal with this isn't necessarily to streamline the.
Yeah,
people,
no,
it's
I
to
just
streamline
like,
the process, cause I do hear a lot of people complain like, I'm looking at this and I just don't know how to navigate. I wanna make it so that if there is a legitimate complaint, we hear it. They just. go through the
I've heard
steps
that
and
a
then
lot.
It comes to us. So they're not like, I'm kinda
Okay.
following it and I don't know, and then.
I
And
don't
I've heard they
necessarily
follow-
want a complaint process to be easy. However, you also don't want it so hard that you end up with really angry and disgruntled people. And I can tell you, having navigated this myself personally, it was frustrating as all get out.
I've heard that before, a couple times.
The only thing I do want to point out is, remember, we have two principals in our district. So we have an online principal and we have. So we may want to just, instead of saying, right, so,
Yeah.
So be-
Good.
well, because the thing is if you say you need to talk to that one, and let's say it's a teacher and they don't like it, then if you go what Eddyville does, it'll jump straight to me and it should not. There should be an insulation. So I would caution changing it now that I think
Well,
about it.
well, and I agree, but because in their unique setting, it was one and the same.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
forgot the other piece. So my apologies.
So
Right.
I wonder, and the thing is like, I think maybe the clear might be to be able to say what Gap said, that you could do an electronic form. And we can run this past pace, like how would we write it to say you can use an email, but the information in the form must be present? Do you see what
Yes,
I'm?
legal, if they have any electronic forms being utilized, because it is easy to turn that form into an electronic
Mhm.
Right. It seems to me
form
like
that can be
it's a
submitted, you
fillable
know what I
information-
mean?
Yeah.
Information needs to be limited to.
We have a
what would be
link.
on the electronic.
We have a link to the policy, we have a link to the AR, we have a link to the electronic form,
Well, the form is part of the AR.
But no, it's a fillable.
a fillable electronic
Yeah.
form. I mean, we
Probably
link to all of them.
Probably don't need that. I was gonna say, we probably don't need that. We probably just.
Yeah, we could do that.
Matter of-
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah,
I
but you
don't
think just
know.
having it?
I think we
'Cause
should
if
do
that's
that.
all-
If it's legal, like if
Yes.
you're trying to
Okay.
get advice on what can we do that. It's
Yes,
not-
is that an
it's not
option?
if
Is
it's
anybody
possible.
else using it?
Let's. we don't-
Can we do that? Because that way we have the form, the person can print it out if they can't.
Or
don't
they
have
can-
the means to fill it out, or it's right there and accessible and ready to fill out. I think that would
So you're
really
saying,
solve a lot of problems.
sorry, I just want to get this right. So can we adjust the last form on the AR to be a fillable form that could be sent?
That
As
can
in
be
sent via
available.
Sent
email,
via email.
via email, yes.
sent
Submitted-
electronically.
Yeah,
Okay,
submitted electronically.
okay. I think GAPS was the only one I read that said or provided an email.
Yes.
I didn't see it
agree.
anywhere else.
I agree. And that seems really odd. If we can sign all of our mortgage papers, if we can sign state and federal contracts electronically, why can we not file a complaint form at a school district with an electronic signature?
I mean, we did have one filed that way, so, but we did recently have one filed via email with the signature and
Scanned and
everything.
uploaded,
Yep.
yes.
So I think it's maybe just putting that in, wording into the policy, right? Or
Yeah.
into the AR.
Yeah,
Yep.
perfect.
Like, I think in reading Greater Albany's, they have more levels, so I think, we wouldn't want to look at those. I just would be cautious, like I said, you have the learn at home, and so you want to make sure that they have that process.
I didn't go and look at all the
Yeah,
GAP's
that-
individual forms.
Yeah, Greater Albany's was quite a bit longer because of bigger district, but I did really like the two things. One, that they pointed out that you could email it. And then they strongly urge you, but almost didn't quite force you to use the form, but really, really tried to get people to use the.
Where do you see that at, or the information on the form provided by email or in writing? Is that the one?
That feel must be filed using the complete appeal form or the information on the form provided by email or anything.
Yep, I see.
So they're like strongly getting you to
Yeah,
try. and
yeah,
get people. And like that, if it's the case that we can't force them to use. it. That's my guess based on the fact that nobody is forcing anybody to use the form.
Or they're using the information on the form.
Strongly urging them and limiting them to what's on the form.
Okay.
I like that part and like the part that they allow electronic submission.
So that's also include verbiage on using the form or the information within the form, correct? I referenced GAP's
So let's
policy,
say
but
must use the appeals form or. You know, file it, with information limited to what would be on, something like that.
Now, if you look at GAPS, they actually have under their public complaint policy. On their website, they actually have the concerns and complaints, so they have the KL. They have the concerns and complaints, so KLAR1 procedure, their public complaint form. And maybe this would help.
Yeah.
Actually states indicate the policy or administrative regulation and complaint type from the following. So it actually says pretty much what policy have they broken.
This is the public one.
And that's getting into another area that I had a little bit of concern, because we were holding people to that, but it's not written in our policy, and I noticed it wasn't in very many policies. It's on a form. Greater Albany, but does the policy state that they must identify them?
But do we really want to keep adding rules where they're already struggling into a policy that they're not feeling like they can navigate through? So add more rules to it? That just
Well,
doesn't
it-
make sense to me.
So how do we make a decision as board? How do we make a decision if it's not in policy?
Well, it has to be in policy.
So then shouldn't they have to reference the policy?
Right, but do we want to make more rules into the policy when they can't already navigate the policy?
Well, my question would be is on the form, would it just hurt, and I'm just throwing that out to say, what policy do you believe the employee broke?
Like,
Let's get them thinking.
like have a fourth field essentially,
Yeah.
so it's like nature of complaint.
What
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 policy
district,
was
po-
violated?
please list the district policy you believe was violated by the employee, because technically you have to be able to show for disciplinary purposes what policy OAR or ORS was violated.
I noticed that most of these policies don't say it's anything about it being the responsibility of the complainant. to Do that.
Well, they have to show what
Yeah,
the
we should.
problem is, and it can't just be because she's wearing two left shoes.
Well, and that should be
might not
the
dance very well.
very
She might
first
not.
conversation, once it gets to an administrative level,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. They're gonna file a complaint, they're gonna say, you upset me by doing this, not gonna resolve, so they're gonna go to the supervisor. The
Right.
very first conversation with the supervisor should be what policy, what law, what, where do you feel this violation falls?
I would agree, and I would tell you, in my experience in working in personnel, if I do discipline, I do have to quote either district policy or state law. So I can't just be
So-
like, you can't say that. According to district policy, blah, 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 staff and workplace relations, you have not fulfilled this piece, or according to ORS 581 dash. So I think perhaps it's not a policy, maybe you are, but we have to remember, people have to remember, just because you don't like my two left shoes doesn't mean if it's not a policy, then there's really nothing we can do about it.
Right.
Well, and I was to question on, so I have a question, and like, it gets to our level because it's about superintendent, or it's even, let's say it's about the board chair, and we go about that and say, it still has to be, I violated policy of the district, correct? Like,
Mhm.
you can only discipline me on violation of policy against the district.
Yeah.
So it's not like, take everything else out of it, like, stop, so I kind of like the line that's like nature of complaint, or not nature of complaint, but like,
What policy do you think they,
yeah.
cause that makes them go like, oh,
Like,
I'm
I don't like their check mark boxes, honestly, cause
I
it's
just
just like
saw
they're too pigeonholed almost, and
Mhm.
like, that's difficult, but if it's there, then it can be their free words.
we could also, I
I
mean,
don't like necessarily holding them to. Requiring them to like go and search out the policy and read them all and figure out which one it was. I mean, if it's
that
common
might-
sense, you can't do this to anybody ever. Now I have to go and find the policy that spells that out.
Right. I think that's over the edge. I think they need to go to their supervisor, which is, the start of it. And then if they don't get any resolution, go to the principal, superintendent, and then working with those two, then, because the superintendent has to identify which policy has been broken.
and at the principal, if you are the.
Right.
So I wouldn't disagree. I think though that people need to understand when you do that, that just because you don't like that I didn't, or whomever said, it doesn't matter. If we don't have it in policy, there's really nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Like, for example, there is some, in my previous position, I looked at policy of staff ethics, which we have, and it really doesn't have any sort of thing in terms of how we treat each other. However, if you look at an OAR, it's called the ethical educator, and actually says the ethical educator will maintain appropriate student adult boundaries, will blah, 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 blah. So I, in my previous position, actually quoted that as being. So I think maybe one of the things we need to tell people is just because you don't like that this person did this, if it doesn't do a policy, I mean, that's where you have to get kind of that opinion. It's just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not.
And it,
And maybe you
Again.
can put a statement in like the form along with that section saying, please don't, this can't be board business unless it actually violates a policy.
Can we just
Do
ask,
it.
we ask Pace
Again.
if they have something like that, like,
Some
can we
wording.
like, but we ask Pace to look at that wording, does they like?
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, just from
Provide
the
us that
the
guidance?
viewpoint of a layperson putting in a complaint, these really look like I could just go up the ladder to the board. And but if there's something that says, you know, at this point, you know, you need to point out an actual policy violation. Where it's not board business, it might help.
Or you might need to say, maybe we can talk about clarifying when it goes to the board. Because like I said, technically, the only thing that you guys could do with personnel other than me would be overturn my decision of this.
shouldn't
Is my
that be
understanding.
in our policy?
No, I believe it's an OAR. But let me check.
We
for
can
sure.
get clarification on that too.
And our policies often refer to the OARs, it might not be a bad idea to put that in there, right?
Well, we should make sure that it refers to an OAR because we don't
So when
want to,
people are reading it, they'll say, oh, okay, based on this administrative rule, I can't make just anything.
So we have a GCPDAR, it says dismissal and discipline of licensed staff. So it talks about the different discipline. And then it talks about dismissal, the difference between probationary and contract, which is a huge difference.
It says right here in our policy, which the
one you have?
board will not hear complaints against employees in session open to the public. And the different things that they can file against.
But we shouldn't be hearing complaints against employees in a closed session,
You can't,
unless it's about Krista. That's the only complaints we can hear in any session.
That. Not what our policy says.
Yeah, that's that. Sorry.
are you on the, hold on.
I'm on our KL policy.
Which
Oh, we're on the
number?
KL policy? Okay.
Wait, you're in,
I just would have assumed based on the discussion that was being had, that our policy should outline the types of complaints we're allowed to be involved in. That's where that direction
So,
should be.
I think
but
that
the
would be
first part of
helpful.
that says any complaint about school personnel other than the superintendent will be investigated by administration before consideration and action by the board.
Yes,
So we
Yeah,
have
that
no
makes-
part in that, and it says the board will not hear complaints against employees in open session.
But again, that leads your average person to believe that
they could,
after the superintendent is investigated, they could take it to the board.
yeah.
Well, no, they're taking the superintendent's decision to the board.
Not the complaint, my decision.
They're taking, they're.
And
they're
then that's
using
actually,
the
that's where I
superintendent's
also
decision.
like that Albany has that appeal for.
Oh, they do. I saw that.
Where if you don't like what someone's decision was. you
it's
can
an actual
it to the
appeal,
board.
yeah.
Say that again, James.
It's an actual appeal versus just,
Elevated
A complaint.
Because then you can't really elevate a general complaint to the board, but you could appeal the superintendent's decision.
Right.
So I think maybe we should add that. Look at that.
It might be cleaner.
Add an appeal to the complaint.
Hold on,
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it.
No, an appeal to the decision of the complaint. Not the complaint itself.
So one of the things I think that Racine and I may need to do a little bit more is exactly outline what can be appealed to the board. So if an employee did not like that I wrote a reprimand, can they appeal that to a board? And truthfully, a parent, unless it's like, I believe, I don't even think you can. If I or any superintendent dismisses an employee due to discipline, I do not believe that the district is allowed to tell, because it's a personnel action.
So the scenario I'm thinking about in this, and I keep coming back to it, that someone comes to you and says, so-and-so sexually harassed me at work, you know, deal with it.
I would be, you might as well fire me.
I
That complaint
know.
should come to me. About me.
I just like, this is just a theoretical scenario, but something where you're like, deal with it, not a problem. Carry on with your work. And then they're like, where do I go from here? Gotta be able to go to the board.
But complaints about sexual harassment,
It
well,
was just.
no,
No, I
I
know.
understand, like, but
Yeah.
those. Protected, I'm gonna say protected class, like protected situation, those actually skip all complaint processes in general, and go
That
directly
wasn't a good
to.
example.
Yeah, but I know, but I do think that like, but for, obviously, actually, for the, probably the comfort of the student, staff and community. Those actually don't go through a complaint process, they go through that legal process too.
Yeah, they go through, there's a sexual harassment process and you, in Oregon, you not only have to do the federal, you have to also do the state. So if I were to get a complaint about sexual harassment, they could literally just tell me and that could be considered. They don't have to put anything. Yeah, that was a risk.
So stealing, like lunch out of the lunchroom, he was doing anybody, you're like, not my problem.
Well, but
So
necessarily.
There's gotta be something in between.
Well, yeah, but my
Just
thing
saying.
would be is then that really does not, I mean, that to me is not a board level. That then goes to the discipline problems and then we have other things because legally, like. If there's an IEP behavior plan, things like
But
that.
so again, if there's no recourse for someone beyond the superintendent. Should that be made clear in the policy?
We'd have to ask legal and see what they would say, cause they might say, no,
Because
you're gonna
it
paint
looks-
yourself in a
Like,
corner.
all of these look like, if you have a problem and it's not solved by the superintendent, you can take it to the board. Even if it's not a dismissal, even though it sounds like dismissal is the only thing we can really do something about. It would be nice to make that clear to people. You've got a problem,
Well, I think,
it's gotta be solved by the superintendent.
well, I don't think it's just a dismissal. I think that anybody can come to the board with a complaint about a decision the superintendent's made.
I disagree, because then that puts the board in right directly square in the path of criticizing operations, which is outside of our scope.
But it says in our policy that they have the right to appeal a decision.
But my question would be, I think, and this is where we need to get clarification. What is the decision? Is the decision of employment only?
Well, that
And
is
if
what we
that's the
should,
case, it
because,
should be made
but
clear.
that's not what it says.
And if you're a layperson, they're like, it's not clear that it's only that.
Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't say that.
Because to me, if I said, no, we're not gonna buy a yellow bus, we're only gonna buy a red bus. And somebody says, well, I'm going to the board because I believe we need to buy a red bus versus a yellow bus. Like. I mean, technically, do you guys really wanna spend your time deciding that?
Well, no, but it says that they have the right to appeal or
They do.
file a complaint about your decision.
They do, but I think that's why you have. That's why you have it go to the board chair to see if maybe that can be resolved prior to coming to the board. But we can ask, like, what
Yeah,
what
I mean,
are
I
the
have that-
decisions made,
Have that
like,
down on what point here, and, I mean, I do think if we say it's. I just think that I would like to not put us in, I don't wanna paint us into a corner where we only can hear certain things. Absolutely not. But I also. Be very transparent, I don't think that all the complaints need to come to the board, I think.
Well,
I'll
no,
be open, I think some things, like, we're changing the culture, and part of that is changing the culture of what people complain about, and sometimes. This is your employer, and quite frankly, if you don't like where you're at, sometimes you can go somewhere else, because this is how this school is running, and are we following the law and being legal and ethical? That's what this policy should be looking at, and it shouldn't be extremely easy,
I don't think it's
necessarily-
that black and white, first.
It's very black and
I
white.
think.
I don't think it is, though.
Well, I
When
think
you
we need
have,
to make it black and white, though, because I do think that we're doing things that actually violate her contract at times too.
well, I think we also need our employees to feel that, yes, we want them here as our employees. And if you say, well, if you don't like it, you can go elsewhere, well, that's not,
Yeah, we have to
I
walk a
just,
fine
I
line
don't
between-
like that statement at all.
We need to walk a fine
Because-
line between making it easy for legitimate.
For
complaints,
legitimate.
Legitimate complaints.
Yes.
But who
because
gets
they're-
to decide legitimate complaint?
Right, well,
That's a very subjective term.
But also the statement, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. I think that's
It's,
very
state is-
blatant and I think
the
it's,
state is an at-will employment state. And if your policies and procedures are outlined and they follow the law, you can choose whether you stay in that or not. Every single one of us have that right.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, we need to hear people. But if
Yes.
there is no valid complaint, which I think if it stepped up the avenue and at the point it is then presented to the board and the board is receiving it and reviewing it, has this broken a law? Has this broken a policy? If not,
But I still disagree with the statement. I think it's blatant and I.
So you
think
disagree
it's-
with my statement?
I think,
Yes.
yes, 100%.
Then I'll change it and say they have a choice to stay in their employment at any place in the state of Oregon.
Absolutely.
We have to do what's best for everybody in the district, and I do think that that's where we have to follow this. And so what we hear cannot be operational work within the hallways.
Right. Right, but I do think that if there's a complaint on the superintendent, we need to hear it.
Like a formal
A
complaint?
formal
Yeah.
complaint.
I don't disagree with you. I would very highly caution you as an administrator in this state. If this board at any time says anytime there's a formal complaint and we don't go through the board chair and it automatically goes to every board meeting, you're not gonna find an administrator who will wanna work. Because there are some complaints that the board chair can come and say, let's talk about it. And, can it be worked out between the
I
superintendent?
agree with that first.
But I will say, if that is why you have board leadership, is to navigate whether or not the complaint has followed your policy.
Mhm.
And if it hasn't, the board chair then needs to, as on behalf of the board, throw it back to ensure it does. Because if you are not following board policy and you discipline somebody, that opens the board up for liability.
Well, and I understand that, and I totally agree with that. I just, we had somebody come to us and say they tried to do this and it just was such a redundant, horrible procedure that they just couldn't get through and they felt like they just kept getting the door shut in their face. And then I felt like the board did not stand up and say, you know what, we're hearing your complaint. Let's see what we can do to push it back and get it worked out.
But I
But-
did that. That is exactly what happened.
Yeah, that particular incident, it was resolved. It got,
And I
and
did,
that was the proper.
and
according to
the
our
steps
contract.
that I took
Mhm.
in a situation like that were to contact OSBA. Actually, I take that back. I contacted the superintendent, contacted OSBA. If there was a formal complaint that would needed to be filed or was presented, it would then go directly to legal. Then the board gets advised from there after the superintendent is made aware of the complaint, and legal guidance. Those are you outlined the exact steps that I took.
And in that situation, the best thing to happen is it bounces back to the superintendent and the superintendent's like, oh, something got mixed up here, whatever, I think that's what we want to happen anyway.
Yes,
We
that's
don't wanna hear-
absolutely what
But-
we want to hear.
But so Deb, so what I'm hearing is that you want everything, even if it can be resolved at a lower level, to be sent to the board.
No.
Okay, that's
no,
what I just wanted to
no,
clarify.
No,
Okay.
no, I think first and foremost, complaints should be one-on-one, try and figure it out. And if that doesn't work one-on-one with the or the principal or supervisor, but I think if it gets to the board, then yes, it needs to be heard.
When you say to the board, you mean to the board chair after advice by legal?
Yes,
And I'm gonna tell you, if that is gonna go a really big slippery slope, because I think that any administrator would say, we all make mistakes, right? There are
Oh.
even mistakes that I do. And so
Absolutely.
sometimes the complaint maybe just be there's a lack of communication.
Mhm.
And that could be a sitting with the board chair, whomever it might be, to say, have you thought about it, looked at it this way? Because I don't believe it rises to the level of a formal complaint, but I think you need to go back and talk to that person.
but I'm talking in a formal complaint,
Okay, so
not
actually,
just your
Oh.
two left shoes.
like they filed the formal complaint with
They followed all the
Okay.
steps. I just think it needs to be heard when it gets to that.
And it has been.
And
I mean,
I-
has there been a situation where there hasn't been one, I guess?
I just felt with the, well, We don't.
It
know
was spelled
because-
out in our public comment.
Yeah.
There was a frustration
Yes.
spelled out in that public comment. I might have a copy if we want to refer to specifics.
I've got a copy right here.
That they felt that there were some brick walls.
A lot of brick walls and they just couldn't get past them. And that's what
And
I
they didn't
think
know
we
where to
need to
go for
hear.
help.
Yes,
What I'm hearing you, can I summarize what I think I'm hearing you say?
sure.
I think we need to have a step that clarifies the board's role clearly in the complaint process. That the staff can understand it, the public can understand it. We as a board understand
Yeah.
truly our role and our responsibility and how we adopt that.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that I was hoping to get some guidance from OSBA on some education to do with the community on how they work with us as a board. Where our parameters are, how we can help you and how we work together.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of people do think that they should just be able to complain to us on the street or about whatever and
Oh,
everything.
I know.
Right, right. So getting people to truly understand our role,
Mhm.
the box that we are allowed by law to operate in and
Right.
ethically operate in.
Right,
And so just maybe having a statement or some clarification for ourselves that can be presented or somewhere in the policy that clearly state those parameters. So nobody's blindsided by it.
I also do, and I don't disagree with you on that. I also do want to say that sometimes people don't want to do anything except to go to the board. So they would say, well, I didn't understand why I can't go to you. So I think there's also that fine line. You can say yes. And I think sometimes it is human nature that we don't like the answer we're getting. So we keep going. We say, well, we're not, we have this brick wall. And I think maybe some clarification on the board role, but I will tell you, as somebody who's had to do this complaint process numerous times in in 2 to 3 different districts. If you say, nope, you have to go back to that person, some people won't.
Yeah.
So, that's the part we also have to understand is that they don't want to do it. They just want to go up. And if we're used to that culture of, I just go to the higher and get it done, this is going to be that piece. And I think that also takes then the piece of the board to say, I'm not listening to anything that is operations.
Mhm.
I understand your concern. And I think that goes back to what Christine said. That if that's the culture that our culture is we go through this process and people don't want to do it, then there's other places you can go to.
Yeah. With that in mind, we also, just like you're facing in the hallways with your staff, we also have a community culture to change. And our policies weren't always followed as such, and things went in one
Correct.
ear and out the
Yeah.
other. So with that comes the trust, right? So I think if we had something that clearly stated that, and I'm not just saying specifically in regards to the KL policy as far as the community education, I think I myself was clueless before I sat behind this side of the table. And I think there are a lot of people in our community that may not truly understand our roles and responsibilities and what limitations we have. When you have to stop somebody mid-conversation and say, you can't continue this conversation with me if I'm going to be the one sitting at the table to have to vote on this at some point. I can't know too much. They look at you like, whoa, what?
well, and I can
And-
say, since we have changed and been working on this change, I can tell you as many times as they've come up to the cafe and tried to say a complaint, I go, whoa, we can't do that.
Mhm.
The process is in the policy. You need to follow it. Because then if your complaint makes it to the board, if I know about it now, I can't help you later
Yeah.
if I'm gonna listen to the case.
Mhm.
So if you want my voice, then don't tell me your complaint. And I have done that because I know we are all working on trying to change culture and I know it's not easy. I'm the worst for change. I don't like change. But I also did not like the way our school was ran before. So, I mean, an old person has to be okay with change.
And I think a simple response to that is, I know this is not how it was done before. And
Correct.
how it was done before was questionable. I'm telling you, this is by statute, by law. These are the these are the parameters I can work with you in.
Yes.
And so just reassuring them.
But I'm hearing you, but
our
I can't hear you.
conversation that we are handling this seriously. We're
Yes.
taking it serious, and our processes that we have reviewed and we're reviewing right now, so we'll be able to step out and say our processes are solid to make sure that your concerns are taken care of
Exactly.
appropriately and legally.
That's exactly that was my point, that.
Well, and you know, I just want to say too, that this is not what you just said about not knowing. That's not unusual. Even districts who are running well still have that issue, right?
Yeah.
We look at things like when you talk about gaps. Gaps had a change, Newburgh had a change. Newburgh's change actually led to lots of lawsuits because people came in and did things that they shouldn't have because by God, and they didn't follow policies. And so I do think that's one of the things that we need to look at is to make sure our policies are updated. I'm trying to get to the board policy because I wonder if it does say what you just said. If you're, because board members have policies, it's under AB in our policy. I can't seem to get into my computer.
Do you want in mine's open?
No, I need to get to the actual website.
So you want, the LC school district?
Yeah, because I wonder if it does say the board. And maybe it doesn't need to be in the complaint policy. Maybe it's like, maybe we need to put specific board policy where people.
Reference.
So if you go to board governance, thank you. Board power and duties. What is that? It's BBA.
You're sure you don't want the bias incident? Legislative and rulemaking authority and regular judicial authority. Or a fact finding body or court of appeal for staff members, students, and public when issues that involve board policy or agreements. As provided by law, policy, or contract, board act, finding body or court of appeal for staff members, students, and the public when issues involve board policies or agreements and their implementation, and when the board must determine the rights, duties, or obligations of those who address the board.
So if you go to BBAA, individual board member authorities and responsibilities.
BBAA.
Yep. Number 3 says action on complaints or requests made to board. When board members receive complaints or requests for action from staff, students, or members of the public, the board members will direct staff, students, and members of the public to the appropriate complaint policy KL. Such information will be conveyed to the superintendent.
Mhm.
So I mean, right there, it also says how.
So I wonder if, like, you know, the little link we have to the complaint policy on our
Yeah.
page, if it went to like a explanatory page first that had like that policy there, and
Mhm.
then had the link to like the complaint policy in the form where they would have to go through and read that before they got to actually filing a complaint. Or some sort of explanatory page that told them how it works.
I see what you're saying.
Because a lot of the wording in the policy, again, I feel like it's not clear to the average person. what
Okay.
They can bring to the board.
So under board on the I'll see, if you go to the bottom, it says public complaint policy. Are you talking, Soren, that maybe we could just say the board hears blah, 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 blah. If you have a complaint, like maybe we could say, please, we can just make it sound a little bit more clearer. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, just so there's like because again, as Jamie said, like our community is not used to this.
Okay.
And so if we had like an explanatory page, they see it first, like they go, let's say, I'm gonna file a complaint. Then it goes to a page that says, this is what you can actually complain to the board about. If you got other complaints, you gotta go to the superintendent. And like, here's the bit of like our board policy that says why we do this and not that. And if you still feel like you need to file a complaint with the board, here's the form, please use it before you're followed.
Or we could actually, that's where you could put like the electronic.
So I would,
Okay.
I would, I think referencing BG is important too, because it does talk about here, like the staff communication to the board, and now, and this is staff, it doesn't say community, it does say staff. But then it also talks about board communication to the staff. And I think an important note here, and while where I think the abuse of power occurred previously is right here, but I think this is where we're making some changes in the trust that we have. The reality is the staff don't come to a board member on the street to complain about the superintendent or in the hallways, because we employ that person and there's a process to that. But it goes the other way as well, BG. We don't go to the staff member and say, we don't like that you talk to our kid and I'm a board member and I can talk to you this way. The staff are also protected by that relationship with the superintendent. And so I do think it's important to call out that this was probably abused in the past. This was I mean, I think that.
Oh, gosh, yes.
But I think it's a culture change, right? Like
Yeah.
we had board members sitting in offices all day long. I think that's intimidating. I think there's just things that happen that, but like, if we get back to basics and we look at what is that relationship intended to be, that relationship between the board and the superintendent and the superintendent and staff, it's kind of a buffer in all of it to make sure that the school functions like a well-oiled machine. And that there is, so back to like the relationships, this is why do we have these things? I think BG is a good one to put in that same space.
And there's,
But I need to be that explanatory, that the board policies. Very helpful. I was kind of smiling because I was thinking about that audit questionnaire, where like, how do you communicate with staff and that like fraud will be tolerant? I'm like, I don't.
You're my
I
superintendent.
Yeah.
set policy and the superintendent, like,
I think I put NA on that one.
it's
not applicable.
policies, procedures.
I think it would be like through the through the exception of the policies. So how about,
It's that, I know that's.
Yeah. how about this? How about Christina and I do some back to pace
Oh, yeah.
about some of the stuff?
Yeah.
And then why don't you let me work on the public complaint policy page on the website?
I really actually think that might be the most beneficial part, rather than like revise even the revisions that we've discussed, like having an explanatory page for the public where they're not like looking at this policy going like, what do I do? It looks like I can do anything I want.
can I ask a question of you, Krista?
Yes.
Can you provide us a copy of what your complaint process is?
Be more
as far
specific.
as your staff? Is there directive in their handbook on how they are to handle a complaint? Cause it should probably.
Oh, so what is her
It should
policy for
flow-
her
Yeah,
employees?
yeah, it should kind of flow together. They should maybe kind of state the same message.
Our complaint policy says, I mean, by law, the complaint policy for staff follows KL.
Okay.
So, like, let me see if I can find it.
I just didn't, that would be a really good. That doesn't obviously get out to the public, but if they run parallel or merge
I think
together
they have to.
nicely.
So according to the reporting procedure, and again, this mostly goes towards like bullying, sexual harassment, blah, 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 blah. Is that any employee aware of discrimination, harassment, da, 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 da. Employees may report people listed above regardless of chain of command. If the complaint is against the principal, the employee may report the complaint to the superintendent. If the complaint is against the superintendent, the employee may report the complaint to the board. So that is like for
Okay,
sexual
okay.
harassment. But I will tell you in conversations where we've had employees complain and about perhaps other ones, I will say, have you spoken to your colleague?
Right.
That's where we go first. And then, but there is a point where I'm like, we're gonna talk about it because like this is above and beyond speaking to colleagues. So a lot of times it is for discrimination, perceived discrimination or harassment, if that makes sense. And that right there, you don't, obviously want to go to the employee.
Discrimination or bullying.
Bullying, yeah. So
we've had issues, I will tell you, we've had issues where an employee did not like what an employee said about them. Okay, well then could you please go talk to that, but we would be more than happy to facilitate a conversation. But we want you guys to work it out as much as you can.
Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with us.
And it doesn't. So that's where I think we have to be careful as well, is because you say, well, if they don't like the decision that I said, you need to go work it out. Technically, as I'm the superintendent, should they be able then to appeal my decision to you because I told them to go work it out?
Well, I guess it would depend on, do they feel intimidated? Do they feel bullied? Do they feel harassed? I mean, if they're feeling those things and you said, go work it out, then,
That would definitely
yeah.
be a problem.
Well, there, yeah,
That's-
but I think we also have to remember too, because this is something that people come, well, I feel bullied, why? Because they don't like me. You bullied is because of a protected class, so you have to
Yeah.
show if you're sex, you know,
Mhm.
gender, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So why don't we do this, just to kind of go, Christine and I will do some clarification with Pace Legal. I will work on I will work on some wording and I'll bring it to the board before we put it on about maybe how can we make our public complaint policy page a little bit clearer about what the board's role is, what we, you know, expect. And I'm not saying that we'll make like a 3-page essay, but it's just clear, like the board, if you have, you know, the board has this policy, please feel free, you know, you need to
Mhm.
follow it, however, but we'll look, I do think maybe, Racine, that we could put the wording in gaps that we would take acceptance via email of whatever.
There was a strong push to get them to use their phone.
Yes.
Well, and I think
But
they
then
also
like-
found it in the recommendations from OSBA.
So this is the list I have. I just wanna make sure it's all inclusive. So with PACE, the following need to be discussed. Can we make a fillable form that's able to be sent electronically? Can they provide guidance on verbiage around what the board can hear? Is it possible to attach an appeal form to the KLAR as well? From the gaps area, it would be that in section, well, in all of the KL policy or procedure, I think is what Jamie said. That we would reference using the form and allow it to be sent electronically. So, because there's a couple of places that that's talked about. And then, and then is there verbiage around keeping information limited to the form if we can get that from Pace as well? And then I think there's an education component of what is the board's role in the complaint process? And then can we get an ORA that references why we essentially can't hear the complaint on the street?
We could see that, like, according to OAR, I mean, that could be something that we could put on our website.
Oh, and
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and
I-
a link to that, be like, and here's why, yeah, click on this link and it takes you to the.
Yeah.
state of
So I
Virginia
said-
Rules, it says.
I just put, how do we break the culture? And I highlighted the webpage, like putting
Mhm.
education out on the webpage about that.
So if you, it probably won't happen before December.
Right.
Is it all right if we spend a month or two working on it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we're showing
We're
good
all in
faith.
this for the long haul.
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't scare us like.
We're done, we're done this.
And I will also try to pin Vince again and ask again if there are some resources that can be shared, some educational materials that explain our role that we could share with the community.
Nancy.
Nancy Hungerford. I would probably start with OSB.
Just a little cheaper.
Maybe I'll talk to Kristen, not Vince.
Miles.
Yes,
I was just thinking.
because she also wears the, I mean, he does.
Thanks for coming, give it a, Facebook, I'll give it a presentation. So what nothing's funny.
Honestly, it would be really great if there was I haven't looked, if there was like a YouTube video that you could link on a site and share, that you could share on Facebook and say, this is the role. Yeah, no. That's way
I
beyond.
don't think
my
many people are really
expertise.
gonna look at that. I just don't. I
Well,
don't think.
but
If it's just a quick, short 10-minute video on the role of the board and how the community works with the board
Yeah,
for
I don't-
success of your students, I would have watched it.
So, I said this to you in like months ago, right? Like, cause you talked about community engagement. So, but Deb, to that point, we don't think people will watch something. When does it start becoming their responsibility to educate
agree.
themselves though? Like
Mhm.
how much do we meet them? Do we meet them at the finish line or do we meet them like
In the middle.
3/4 of the way and then start
Mm.
stepping back a little bit and
Yeah.
provide, like, I feel like we've met them at the finish line. Actually, we did that 2 years ago, right?
Yep.
And now I feel like we're kind of at that, okay, we step back like 3/4 of the way and now we're also maybe gonna step back a little bit more.
The only thing that makes us different than the other schools is we're such a small community.
Right.
And, Jane and Joe are friends and Joe's on the board and, that's how it's always worked here. And you're right, we are trying really hard to change this, but because we're so small, it's a really hard step.
But we aren't that small.
We
Because
are.
it's not, and this is what we also need to take our blinders off, is it's not just the people that come into the cafe or come into the Merc for coffee. We have a whole set of constituents over the hill.
I
We have
agree.
a whole set of constituents online. So we aren't as small as we once were, so we can't use that excuse anymore.
But we are in a lot of ways. And a lot of it could be just because I am right there. And it's easy access instead of me just being at home and they're not just coming to my house.
Anytime you go out, like almost everybody in town knows school board. I mean,
Yes.
I will say though, if we are providing the education out there, we're putting it out there, right? I mean, there's been plenty of times that Jamie and I have had conversations not board related necessarily, and she's like, well, but did you ever look at this or have you seen this? I'm like, no, I haven't. She's like, well, if you go out there and you look at, or she'll send me those links. Well, I can't go complain to Jamie the next Tuesday and be like, well, she'll be like, Kristen, I just sent you those links. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, and so that's part of it too. Like, if we we got plenty of strong people over the hill and in town and have relationships in the school that, I think some of it is we do provide the information.
We do.
And if you want to be my friend and not like how my decision was behind the board, then you criticize me all you want over coffee. But it's still on the webpage for you to go look at if you have.
And I totally agree with
But I
that.
think that protects you too. Like, I'm gonna be your friend. I'm gonna have coffee with you, but what page?
Well, and I can't
Oh, I
help but
do.
think
Trust me. I'm like, no,
I know.
from my involvement and interactions with another school's board and sitting on the parent side, it's really hard to find information. It is really hard. So if we take that hard, if we just give them some basics and have a spot to refer them to, they'll take it or leave it. And they can choose whether they're going to continue to complain about it or not. But we're taking down a barrier.
Really say it's there.
And
you
I-
can go.
And I can't help but think that many other districts would want to jump on board because so many people don't understand.
You're right.
You might be a trendsetter.
Yeah.
Well, and it's because it's always been too easy.
Well,
There was reasons why but back to your point, Deb, there were reasons why we had to make it easy at some point, right? But
Yeah.
now we're years away from that.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness,
Mhm.
right?
right.
We
the lessons
we
have
have
been
the
learned.
opportunity to work together to do some of this, educate more and not make it a cluster out there. It's ugly for a while too.
Mhm.
Perfect. Okay, so you guys are
Yes.
okay with our next steps?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
I am not gonna make Russ watch this. Probably. Is he gonna? Okay, I'll give him a call this week or weekend.
Are we kind of I mean, you kind of already did, but we are accepting electronic documentation on complaints currently as we sit and operate today.
Only thing that, yes, so as long as it follows a process of the form or
Yeah.
the guidance of the
Yes.
form,
Okay.
that has been accepted
Yes.
across the
Okay.
board.
Okay. Did we address, there was a concern about having somebody to ask questions about the process too?
I think that the natural person would be Laura.
Okay.
So we could put it, if we could put that if you have questions about this process, please contact the executive secretary to the board.
Yeah.
Laura can just.
Honestly, that's the way in my administrative assistant group that's all of theirs. You present it to the
Yeah, I-
executive secretary and then they vet it to the correct.
I think that's a great idea to make sure
And I think
that
we
if
should
there
list
is
it.
any questions
Okay,
to
that'll be
contact
part of
Laura.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would,
In the procedure, correct?
yeah, and what, well, on the webpage, because what if, because here's the
Oh,
problem.
okay.
This is the problem we're also having. Is some of the policies say, here's the person you're supposed to connect with,
Yeah.
and then they leave, and then like Laura and I are reading, and I was like,
That's
that
what-
person hasn't been here 6 months.
A title though, right?
Yeah.
If you
But
use
the
the
title
executive
would be fine.
secretary,
Yeah,
if we
to
read
the board or something like that.
executive secretary.
Yeah.
to the
I-
board.
But, I put it on the webpage, so it's, you may not be able to notice it yet, but when I get it in an Excel format, that's what the webpage column. It's in her brain.
And it will be in Excel format.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay.
speak that language.
Yeah. She doesn't hate that language.
Okay,
Okay, so just to go back, I just want to make sure we don't have any adjustments that we want to make to the KL. Is that correct still? After it, okay. Then we went through all the KLAR modifications.
Mhm,
That takes us to adjournment,
mhm.
unless there's any other conversation.
I had coffee, so I'm not quite as tired.
I had some of
Do you see that?
KL, adjustments to the KLAR in addition of maybe education page.
It got, yeah,
On the
Yep.
website.
yes,
Yep,
yes.
okay.
Not necessarily part of either the policy or the AR, it's just.
Just
think
more
that helps.
education.
And then I'll be like, okay, let's work a little longer. Let's
Come on,
work
we
a
got
little
this.
longer. Let's do it a little longer.
All right.
I only
and
drink
that-
one cup coffee in the morning, yeah.
Okay.
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm like. Now what do I do?
I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn us then at 7:16 PM.
I'll go home, clean house.
Well, that sounds thrilling.
Doesn't it?
Checking the election results here, Lauren, I came here totally.
I'm gonna go ahead and leave these
Rest-
here.
Whatever, I was gonna be like, you know, if you're prepping it and see it. If something happens, it's not gonna happen out here tonight. You're fine. All the bad things you think are happening.
Is,
It's take years.
is, been shutting us down.
Thank you again for dinner.
No problem.
Yes, thanks for doing that. Sorry, I didn't
You
cheat.
can put tomatoes in it.
Three of them.